Welcome, everybody, to the Tools for the Modern Man podcast. I'm your host, Pete Veskus, and today my guest is John Verrico. John Verrico is the founder of Share Your Fire. He is a longtime public servant as the chief media and community relations expert for the federal government, and I'll let him go more into that. He's also a former president of the National Association of Government Communicators. He's a fellow author in Cracking the Rich Code, where we share chapters in volume 10 together. He's a public speaker, trainer, everything. He's pretty much got everything you need. And he asked me to say that he's the best thing since sliced bread. And I'm going to add that in because it's true. So John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Pete. So great to be here.
Yeah. So you and I, we've been together. We've known each other now for about a year in the mastermind that we're in for the Cracking the Rich Code group. All a group of amazing thought leaders, amazing people in general. And I love having my co-authors on the podcast because we usually get into really good conversations and they bring such amazing insights and a different perspective than what I usually give. So, you are a communications expert. So tell us a little bit about your history, what got you here, and where you're going to next.
Oh, so much. How much time do we have? I got a long history. No, I'm kidding. Being in communications, it didn't start out that way. We don't always have a plan for what we're doing in life. We think we do, but things change, right? So when I first left high school, I was going to go into electronics because that was like the coolest thing. We had an electronics shop in high school. And there was wood shop and there was metal shop and there was auto shop, but there was an electronics shop. And I built a metal detector and I thought it was so cool. And so that's what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to go into electronics and I'm going to build cool stuff like this. And I went to school for electronics, electrical engineering and electronics technology. And I worked for a couple of years in the field and realized that although I was really good at the work, I was bored to tears with the work. But what I was doing a lot of times...
Let me hold you there for a second.
Yeah.
Is this something I don't know about you? Are you an engineer as well?
Originally, yes. Yeah. But that was so long ago in such a small period of time.
It's just only funny for 2 years. I'm also an engineer who can talk, so we're part of a very small minority. So sorry to interrupt, but I just thought that was new. I didn't know you had trained as an engineer and were just like me, bored of the technical.
Yeah, it was electrical engineering, and so I was working in companies where I was the assembly line technician. So the circuit boards and the electronic components were coming off of the assembly line, and if they didn't work in the first testing phase, they'd come to my department, and we would try to figure out what the heck is going wrong and try to get these things back working again. What I found I enjoyed, I liked the problem solving, but once I'd solved a problem and found what I sought were the commonalities. And then I wound up doing training for my fellow technicians. And I wrote training manuals for them to help them overcome these kinds of problems. And I found that I enjoyed the writing and the training portion a lot more than I enjoyed the actual work itself. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to school because I said, I want to do writing stuff. And so I went back to school to be a journalist. Major
That's a 180.
Shift.
That's a full
big
180.
Shift. And so I went back to school to get to pursue a journalism degree. And now I have, by the way, I didn't get my electrical engineering degree. I went to an associate's degree, but I was too busy chasing girls to actually complete all the courses I needed. And I was a history class shy of my associate's degree in electrical engineering.
Oh my God, that's funny because most people who don't finish engineering, it's just because they couldn't finish engineering, not because they had better extracurricular activities.
Yeah. So, okay, a little bit further back in history. Okay, when I was in high school, I was the little kid. I was only 5'3", weighed 110 pounds when I graduated at the age of 18. So I was a little picked on, scrawny, pipsqueak kind of thing. So I did not have dates. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole other hour podcast just on that background. But so in college, I actually grew a little bit and became a little bit more physically active. So I started actually putting on some some weight, not in a bad way. And so I discovered girls. Uh, so, so I think I majored in girls and minored in electrical engineering at the time.
Yeah, and you always go to where you focus your attention, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I focused. Yeah, I shouldn't say girls, but I focused on dating.
yeah.
That's really what was going on. But anyway, so here I am now making this shift to journalism, and I went to the same 2-year college, but to a whole different building. And so I'm going to get my associates in journalism, and I never did take that stupid history class, so I still didn't get my degree. But I started freelancing and got a job as a freelancer and started doing some writing and getting published. And this is great, but I couldn't get hired on to staff. And here was my problem. In order to pay my way through college, I was doing side jobs of all kinds. I was a short order cook. I was a janitor. I was a bartender. I was a roadie with a band. I started doing stand-up comedy. I was a disco dance instructor. I did all this stuff. And most of those were nighttime jobs. So my whole biorhythm, that worked out pretty well for me because I've always been kind of a night owl. I can't get up in the morning. So I was not reliable. And I never got to the news story on time. So I was a really good writer, but I wasn't reliable to get to the place on time to capture the news before it was history. So anyway, long story short, or long story long, whatever. I did start trying to make my way as a journalist. I was doing some freelance stuff, but I wasn't getting a solid job. And finally, my kid brother said to me, I think I'm going to join the military and get some discipline in my life and kind of go on a career path. And, heck, you're not doing anything worthwhile. Why don't you join me?
Come with
and
me.
I said, you know what? That's a great idea. Thanks, kid brother. So we both signed up for the Navy, and we were in the delayed entry program because both of our schools had a little delay to get in. And I was signing up to be a Navy journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a change where we both had, I don't know, like 18 months we had to wait before our schools opened up. And so all of a sudden I got a call saying, hey, the school has opened up. There's been a cancellation. So if you want to go, you can go now. And my brother said, go ahead and go. I'll meet you out in the fleet. He's still laughing to this day because he never put the uniform on.
So he was like, hey, bro, come join me. Bait and switch. That's a classic younger brother's program, by the way.
It absolutely was. And he laughs to this day. He says, I'm the one that straightened you out and so yeah, I joined the Navy to get some discipline in my life, and I started a career as a Navy journalist. And what I found out about being doing that type of work in the military is you're not just writing for the base or ship's newspaper or whatever. You're doing everything in the communication field.
Mm-hmm.
And so here I was, reported to my first ship, and I'm running 2 TV stations, 2 radio stations, doing all the programming, doing the evening newscast. I'm anchoring the evening news. I'm the ship's photographer. I'm also writing, I'm producing, writing and producing the ship's newspaper. I'm doing newsletters that get home for the families. I'm doing press releases that went to the media. Anytime there was a media query, I coordinated the interviews. I trained people on how to do media interviews. I prepared speeches for the commanding officer and worked with him to prepare to brief the troops on stuff. And basically anything in the communication field I was doing.
That actually sounds really fun, especially if you're young and
was.
Yeah, like and I got a question for you on this. In the Navy or in the military, do they have their own special TVs? Because I don't know. I've never served, so I don't know what the setup. They're like
so obviously, if you're in a base here in the stateside, right, you're going to catch the local news and all that stuff and all the local programming and all of that. But when you're on a ship or you're in a base overseas, you don't have those options. So the military bases overseas and on Navy vessels, we have our own closed circuit television system. We would get programming. Of course, this is going back to when I was there, programming on beta tapes or VHS tapes and on, film reels, 35 millimeter film reels, that we would, 16 millimeter film reels that we would, run. And that's how we actually did all the programming, and all the radio shows would come to us on reel-to-reel tapes.
Oh, wow.
And these were the pre-produced stuff by the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service, but then we do a lot of our own local programming.
So you were also DJ, the voice, the late night DJ voice.
I was everything. By the way, I didn't mention I was a staff of one doing all of those things.
Yeah, that sounds, but I think when you're younger and this is all brand new, you don't know any different. So
Yeah,
I bet you didn't even know that you needed more people to do
I did
this
not
with
know.
you.
I did not know. What I loved about it was no 2 days were the same.
Yeah.
Right. We just did all kinds of stuff. And I liked the breadth of the types of work that I was doing. But you're right. I didn't work with another person who knew my job field.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know I should really have some staff.
Yeah.
The interesting part was my bosses, not being related to the public affairs field or the communication field, had no idea what my job really was. That worked in my favor sometimes and sometimes against me, right? Sometimes they just assumed I knew what I was doing and I was doing a good job. And other times they figured that I was probably slacking because I must be, slacking off because there's nobody really to keep tabs on me.
Yeah.
But it was 12 years before I actually worked with somebody else in my career field.
So you did that for 12 years and then you kept moving through. So I'm going to fast forward you a little bit towards kind of the tail end here, because I have a ton of questions because you're a communications expert. So, now that we know not only a communications expert, you're a media expert. You know how to, juggle 1,000 different responsibilities. You get, you're doing this for 12 years, which I think sounds crazy. Like that would burn me out after about 5 or 6 years, right? Where did that go after? Like where did you end up, and how did you get to where you were at the tail end?
When I left the Navy after 10 years of active duty and then another 15 in the reserve, but when I left active duty, I was looking for where I was going to go. Am I going to go work for a newspaper? Am I going to go work for a television station? And I realized that none of those things seemed attractive to me because I would just be doing one type of work. Every news story would be different. Every day would be different, but the work type would be the same. So I found that in government agencies, in government public affairs positions, these are the people who help the government communicate to the public about what they're doing. And I'm not talking the politics side. I'm talking the day-to-day operations of, environmental support and, running the park service and, that kind of stuff. Those roles were kind of like what I was doing in the Navy. You're doing a little bit of everything. And so that's where I went, and I started working for state government in Maryland, and then ultimately into federal government. And I just wrapped up my career after, out loud, 42 years working between the military and state government and federal government. I just retired in December.
Well, congratulations,
2023.
and thank you for your long service. I was there the day that you were like, "This is my last day," and so
That's true. That's right. That our last call was on our mastermind call was on the day that I had was my last day on the job. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So I congratulate you. That that's an achievement, and it's interesting. A lot of times people hear, "Oh, I've been in a place for 45 years or 40 years or something of that length." But they don't realize, I think what you were able to capture was this diversity and this being able to keep yourself kind of challenged and put yourself in a position to really have impact. You kind of mentioned choosing between, going into the government or going to a TV station or something like that. Like,
Yeah,
your bigger
or
impact.
even going to corporate America. Like I could have done, communications and marketing in a PR firm or something, or going to some big company. But I did not want to. My life purpose was not to help make some CEO richer.
Mhm.
I don't want to go out there and be responsible for, more Pepsi products to be out there on the road. I wanted to make a difference in what I did. And I found that in government, I actually could do that because I was able to communicate important life-changing information for people, whether it was, anything from, COVID awareness or how to how to use various government facilities, or how to protect the environment, or whatever it was that I was working on, was important information for the public. And I felt that I was making a difference in people's lives. And that's what I really loved about it. And as part of all of that, 99% of what I was doing was storytelling, right? But that storytelling wasn't my story. It was helping other people tell their story, helping the scientists, the engineers, the cops, whoever it was, be able to relate their story, training them how to do a media interview, how to do a public hearing in a potentially hostile environment.
This is great because I'm gonna comment on this. Like that's almost my first question that I have written down for you. So, I'm very much in the same vein as you. I'm an engineer, corporate, public servant as well. And I found that the biggest superpower that I have for most of the times is just being able to create that bridge, that link between the technical people and what they're trying to accomplish and the organization and what they're trying to accomplish, because there is usually a communication gap between them. And
Absolutely.
it's funny because you expect that senior members, senior management, executives, that they would be good at this, right? The reality is they're not. Most of them
No.
are terrible at this, right? And it takes that specialized person to be able to bridge the gap. I'm going to start with
But
how
one
do
thing
you,
before, I
yeah.
just want to elaborate on that point. A lot of times, whether it's in government or in the nonprofit sector, you'll see this a lot. People will affiliate with an organization because they're either passionate about the subject matter and they're experts in the subject matter, or they are administrators and don't really know the subject matter, but they know how to run an organization.
Mhm.
And you'll see a lot of organizations fail where they don't have somebody who understands business structure, but they had everybody who was passionate about the mission of the organization. And then you'll see other places that will fail because they've got people who are leading with some sort of a business focus without understanding the mission focus.
Well, and this goes back to, we can go into a 4-hour podcast on the what makes a leader. And when I look at business and when I look at any structure of business, whether it's public service or a small brick and mortar or corporate, there is the management, there is the organization, there is the execution part, but a leader is that person who can bring them all together. It's
Yes.
the tentacles that kind of pulls it together. Sometimes that leader is the CEO. Sometimes the leader is just a team lead who can communicate really well
Yep.
and can step up and basically say, "Oh, I see what you're trying to do. Am I correct?" And then going to the next person saying, "Hey, I see what you're trying to do," and then bridging the gap, right? So
That's been my role, my focus, and that's kind of where I went with Share Your Fire. But go ahead.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. So I'm going to start because, if you're the front face of the Department of Homeland Security, right? So I'm
Well,
sure
for the research and development arm of Homeland
for the
Security,
okay, for the research and development
I
arm.
wasn't the guy doing the policy stuff and the enforcement stuff. I was on the research and development, so we were doing stuff like search and rescue tools for the fire department and that kind of stuff.
True. But my experience when dealing with the public, right, is sometimes you can face a hostile crowd.
Oh yeah,
Like maybe a crowd that has different information coming at them. They're not educated on certain topics. They've come in with bias, right?
yeah.
And I'm going to use the hostile crowd of the public because of your experience. I'm sure you have a good story or two to tell on this, but I think this applies to any hostile crowd, whether it's a teams or whether it's family members, right? So,
Yeah.
from your experience, how did you deal with hostile crowds?
Well, the most important thing is to understand where they're coming from and why they're potentially hostile. Right. Put yourself in their position and understand what information they've been fed, where they be forming their opinion from, and then how do you counter that without being confrontational?
Okay.
And so it's really a matter of understanding and putting yourself in that perspective. And sometimes it means coming from a point of vulnerability and sharing that vulnerability.
Okay. So this is a tactical podcast, right? I love to bring the big ideas. We all talk about putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes and everything else. What is one way that you would start like how would you start that conversation with some group that was, you knew was out to get you?
All right. I'm gonna do this through a story because that's the way I do it. So when I was working at the Department of Environment in Maryland, this is the state agency, there had been some information that had come down about contamination in fish, locally caught fish. So even though we haven't been putting lead and PCBs and other chemicals into our waters and in our environment for decades, that stuff is still there. It doesn't go away. And so there's mercury, there's lead, there's PCBs, all kinds of stuff. And so it's in the environment, and the bugs, and it's in the soil at the bottom of the lake or the river, right? And the insect life that lives down there kind of gets little bits of it in their body, right? This is bioaccumulation. You've heard this topic, right? So little fish eat the worms and the bugs, and then bigger fish eat the smaller fish. And so each time you go up the food chain, the larger fish are accumulating more of this. Let's use mercury, for example. Now, how many times have we heard about mercury scares in fish over decades?
Don't eat sushi, don't eat tuna, right?
Yeah, all this kind of stuff. Yes. Swordfish was off the list for a long time because the problem is these chemicals are still there. And so even though there's just one little tiny molecule of the stuff in little fish, a bigger fish eats 1,000 of those fish. Well, he's got 1,000 of those molecules, and the bigger fish. Anyway, so new studies came out because for so many years, doctors were saying, back off of the red meat, America. Let's start eating more fish. Fish is healthier. So people started eating more fish. So the scientists somewhere said, hey, if people are eating more fish, then people are getting more of these contaminants. It's not that the fish are more contaminated than they used to be. It's not that the environment is more polluted, but people are consuming more of it. So maybe they need to back down a little bit.
Well, they were getting their omega-3s and mercury.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So it's not that fish were bad. They're good for omega-3s. They're bad
great for omega-3s, but they're also getting mercury. So now we're putting out, the Department of Environment is going to put out some guidance on what kinds of fish to eat or eat less of from different bodies of water. Like, don't eat, largemouth bass out of this particular lake, or if you do, you can do it, once or twice a week, but don't eat it every day.
Yeah.
And so this was the kind of
off the right. Do not, or Erie. Which was the one that didn't have fish in it anymore?
Oh, well, yeah.
Erie, no fish from Erie at all.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, there were some that were, hey, don't eat this stuff. So that's going to impact people. It's going to impact the subsistence fishermen, the person who actually goes and catches their own food in order for his family to be fed that week. It's going to impact, probably most of all, commercial fishermen who are out there on these rivers and in these bodies of water and selling those fish as their way of life. That we knew was going to be a problem. When we go and announce it's time to back off eating fish from these bodies of water, and the commercial fishermen are relying on being able to sell that fish in order to make a living, there's going to be a problem here. So one of the first things we did was we brought them in and we sat them down and we said, how can we lessen the impact on you before we make this announcement? What can we do? This is the science. The science doesn't change. We're not telling people don't eat this fish. We're not saying to people that they're going to die if they eat the fish. But we are saying that if they eat this fish every day for 30 years, there's a 1 in 100,000% chance that they're going to get cancer or something from it. So we want them to have variety. We want them to buy from you out of this body of water and then go to that body of water and buy from you. So how can we do this? So we actually worked with the commercial watermen to craft the message that went public. So they were already on board. They knew what was coming. They still didn't like it, but they, they came to an agreement like, okay, what we will be able to do is we will label our fish as to where they came from, what body of water, so they have a knowledgeable public. The next thing we did was we went to the sports writers who wrote about fishing in Maryland. And we sat those guys down and said, look, in 2 days, we're going to issue a press release and all the mainstream media are going to go, oh, polluted fish, don't eat our fish. So before they do that, we need you guys to write something that is sane, science-based, and all that stuff. So we worked with them, and we worked with some environmental writers and other reporters that we knew and had trusted and worked with to develop messages that kept things calm before we went public.
Yeah, so really it comes back to that whole collaborating and bringing people in ahead of time, not just dropping the bombs on them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I see that as the biggest mistake anyone can make in any situation. You can take a good situation and turn it terrible by just dropping bombs that have no collaboration to them.
Right. And or no background or whatever. I mean, you've got to do some legwork.
Yeah, and the context, especially when it's a negative message being brought forward, that information, you almost have to come forward with the whys first and then the hows. Like, this is what we're trying to do, and how can we do this so it has the lowest amount of negative impact?
Yeah.
But that does take I don't know, that takes real fortitude, resilience to be able to handle that feedback, because it's not going to be good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it took some doing, but in the long run, it was successful. So, but yeah, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of stamina, and a good hard shell.
Yeah. This next question kind of pivots on a flip of that one. I'm sure you've had to communicate information where you couldn't give a lot of background. How do you do that? Because this is something that I think permeates, small businesses, like owners, right, who have to make decisions and they can't necessarily explain the complete breadth of the decision to their entire staff or to all these people. So, in your experiences, how have you delivered a message when you really can't get into the details?
That's coming from the military background. That was pretty common half the time, right? You really can't.
That's why I thought you were the best person to answer this question specifically.
It's really funny. My first day on the job at the Department of Natural Resources, there was upcoming Naval Academy graduation in Annapolis, in Maryland. Now that doesn't seem to relate at all. But the local newspaper contacted me and said, hey, I understand that the Maryland Natural Resources Police, who provide security on the waterways, are going to be involved in the security for the naval graduation because the president is going to be coming to that. Can you tell me about what kinds of things they're going to be doing? And I used the most traditional line in the security industry that we ever use, which is, I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you. I thought it would cause the same chuckle that I got from you. And instead, the reporter thought it was the greatest thing he'd ever heard. He'd never heard that expression before. And apparently his editor didn't either. So front page of the newspaper of the Annapolis Capital, it says, John Verrico, spokesman for the Department of Natural Resources, said, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. Okay, so now get serious about it, right? I mean, there are so many times when something is going on and you don't have all the information, or you cannot release all the information. And so there are times when all right, I'm going to back up a little bit too, because one thing you have to do is you have to have a foundation of trust.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I want to go back to. The incident with the commercial fishermen and the outdoor writers and the environmental writers. We had a relationship of trust with some of these environmental writers. The commercial watermen did not have a trust of the Department of Environment. A good comparison here. But the public who were buying the fish, and other fishermen trusted the Maryland Watermen's Association. They trusted the reporters that were writing about these things. So when you put together a group of trusted messengers, that helps you to carry this thing forward. When you are working with people who are going to, that you have to relate information to, if you have a foundation of trust between you, then it's much easier to say, look, this is as much information as I have, or this is as much information as I can tell you. If there's a really good foundation of trust, then you can say, this is why I can't tell you. Without giving you the details, if I told you this, this could be the problem. So this is what I'm going to ask you to write about, or this is what we're going to focus on. That foundation of trust is so absolutely critical. But people are going to listen to their trusted messenger. Mm-hmm. And that's why when you have like news commentators that go out there with an opinion, you've got their followers, and everything that comes out of that person's mouth is gospel.
Yeah.
And so if you know that that person is going to be spewing vitriol, then you need to be able to counter that, or feed that proper information. I'll tell you two more brief examples.
Can I just want to ask a couple of things here. So then in an organization, you reached out to the trusted messengers in those different groups, right? They're independent. They're going to make their decision one way or another. When you're within an organization, though, how does that look? Because there are going to be people who don't necessarily agree with that. And
oh yeah, I had to fight leadership on that a lot of times.
Yeah. So, that's something I would, when you're in an organization and you're the CEO and you're the senior VP, and you're kind of sending a message down through, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not being, and it's not something that, again, is wholly unpopular or not really explained off well. How do you, with that trust, because it goes back to the trust, but it also goes back to how do you repair that trust? Because you are taking a withdrawal from the trust bank.
It's true. The one thing you need to do is when there's an opportunity to follow up, do so. That's always very critical. There are two pieces of all of this. One is to be honest as much as possible. Never lie. Don't obfuscate the facts. Give the facts that you can. Mm-hmm. So there's your honesty factor. And honesty is being truthful about what has happened or what's in the past or what is. Then there's integrity. And integrity is, are you honest? Are you being truthful about your follow through, about what's going to happen? So if you say, this is the information that I have at this point, I will get back to you when I can tell you more. And if you don't get back to them, you've ruined that trust. If you do get back to them, then you're building that trust factor back up again. Mm-hmm. So honesty, being truthful about what is or what has happened, and integrity, being truthful about what you intend to do or what the future is going to be. And if that's going to change, be truthful about that as well. So those two factors, by the way, honesty and integrity, are combined, and that is your authenticity factor. People will trust people who are authentic. That means not being perfect. That means having some vulnerabilities, but that means that you are honest and have integrity with everything that you do with your intentions. Now, there have been times I've been placed in a position where I was given incorrect information to put forth. And I corrected that whenever I possibly could do so. But there's also an ethics issue when, and this comes up in sometimes when somebody, like, let's say the boss wants to say something about the product that is not in fact true, or hides the fact that their new product actually has health side effects. All right. You have an ethical decision to make at that point. How much is that job worth it to you compared to your core values of being able to drink this drink? It'll make you, it'll do these great things for you. Well, it also will make you sick. But
Yeah.
if you're not
That's
putting that information out and you're
yeah.
being told to hide that, you have a decision to make in your own ethical values.
That's been my problem my whole career, John. I'm a big mouth, you know, and it gets me in trouble sometimes. But I would have to say that 9 times out of 10, I'm really happy with me being a big mouth and speaking authentically from a place of honesty and, and truth, because
Yep.
there are and this I think is another leadership quality. There are very few people in this world who will sacrifice the job, the sale, that make that pleasing of somebody else to speak the truth with respect, knowing that you're trying to help, avoid something that could be a catastrophe.
So I'll tell you, when I've had people try to sell me something, and we'll have like a little, the traditional little back and forth. And if they're honest with me about something and they say, look, you can get this something similar, cheaper or whatever. If they're honest with me about, the integrity of this window, whatever it is they're trying to sell me, even if they leave that company and go someplace else, I'll follow them.
Mhm.
I'll go buy from their new company rather than go back to the other company. So people don't have loyalties to companies or products. People have loyalties to people.
I 100% agree with that. My wife and I owned a dental practice for a few years, and COVID kind of shuttered us. But I remember,
Imagine that.
yeah, right.
Oh.
And I remember, seeing people, and I also come from a background of my parents owned restaurants, so it was all about relationships and the repeat customer and everything else. But I remember, especially in dentistry, in California, it has a really bad rap. There's the stereotype of the dentist just making a lot of money and basically ripping off their patients. But when I saw the amount of care, the amount of attention, and the amount of time my wife put into every patient, and they never seen it before. Like for
Right.
them, it was like, I can't believe this. And they're still loyal to her to this very day. Like there are people who are like, are you ever going to practice dentistry again? Because I want to get in your seat, right? And so it's just interesting that you're right, 100%. You see that over and over and over again. You treat a person fairly, you're honest with them, even if they don't like the news. Like try to deliver a $10,000 treatment plan to someone for dentistry. That's a very hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, right? But you're saying like, this is why, these are the reasons, here's the thing,
this is what causes this, right?
Look at the quality that you're getting, like this is the attentiveness, like all of those things, and then people value that.
Yes. A good example of that, when you talk about restaurants, right? I will go to a restaurant that has mediocre food and great service that remembers me than going to a restaurant that has superior food, but the staff treats you, they're all snobby or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember going to a restaurant in downtown DC, and it was one of these, poshy places. And I ordered the rack of lamb. I love lamb. And they came out, with their little tiny, little dainty
booties,
lamb chops with the little, with the little bones in them. I'm like, oh man, this was like still in the womb size lamb. This is really tiny. But I'm sorry, I don't let any lamb go to waste. So when it came time that all the meat was off the bone, I am picking that bone up and I'm going to gnaw on it.
Who doesn't? That's the best part.
Right. The waiter actually was approaching our table at the moment and just went and turned away. I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this again.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up some mint jelly in my hand. And
it is funny because I remember when my parents owned a restaurant and I bartend on the weekends, and, I knew each regular's drink.
Yes.
And I would have a cold mug and their choice of beer on, like, as they were sitting in their
as
chair,
they're sitting down. Yep.
Because it's automatic, right? And just that little bit of, hey, I see you. There's 3 things I've learned from communication is the making people feel seen, safe, and heard.
Yes.
As the kind of that holy trinity for me of when I communicate with people and I look back and I see, where did I win? When did I do well in my life? Was when I'm making people feel seen, safe, and heard?
I like seen, safe, and heard. I actually have it narrowed down to a single word: matter. They feel like they matter.
Mhm.
When I walk into a place and like the Dunkin' Donuts that was near my old office when I was commuting into DC, I'd walk past this Dunkin' every morning. The guy would see me outside the door and already have my iced decaf with vanilla unsweet flavoring in it, ready for me to go.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that. That made me feel like I was special and I mattered. And so I made sure that he felt that he was special and what he did mattered. And I would compliment him to the management. And I sent a note up to Duncan headquarters, specifically, just complimenting this person on his ability to do that. My wife and I like to take vacations when we can. It'll be less now now that I'm retired. The income level has dropped to a third, but we'll see what happens with everything else. But every once in a while, we'd like to go on a cruise. Well, people on the cruise ships, they work hard. They work really hard, and they have a choice as to how they're going to deal with their job. Okay, and not all of their jobs are pleasant. And let's face it, a lot of the customers are not pleasant.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it is about people who are on vacation on cruise ships, or people who are on vacation, period. But all of a sudden they become these like, oh, entitled prima donnas, and they get nasty with some of these folks. And some of these people, most of these people are foreign nationals. Most of them are, students or whatever, who've taken these jobs and are really kind of just getting out in the world. And there may be a language barrier. There could be all kinds of things going on. And some people just treat them like crap.
Mhm.
My wife and I go out of our way to get to know them, to talk to them, to chat with them. And those people that respond to that, they get great reviews from us and nice tips and all that other stuff, because they're doing what they think is right. They should feel like they matter. And that actually goes to the core of everything that I do now with Share Your Fire. That's kind of how I got started in this thing. Is, when I was the little kid being picked on by bullies in school, and then when I got into the workforce and I ran across some of those bully bosses, especially in the military, you'll find some of those folks, they have no skill themselves, so they want to, be a jerk. And then there are other people who were just great. And I decided, okay, there are people that made me feel like what I did mattered. They made me feel like I mattered as an individual, as a person, as a human, not just even in the workplace. Those are the behaviors I wanted to emulate. And when I saw those other types of behaviors where people felt that they had to blow out my fire in order to make theirs burn and feel like it burns brighter, those were the folks that I did not want to behave like. And that was the kind of behavior that I vowed to change. And so subtly behind the scenes over my whole career, I've been working hard to change that in traditional leadership and making sure that people were treating others like they matter. And when you do that, that opens up all the doors of communication. So I'm kind of going back and forth in different periods of life, but understanding that if somebody feels like they matter, they feel like you care about them, you feel like you understand their concerns, you know what their likes are, you know what their dislikes are, that makes all the difference in the world about how they treat the next person down the road as well.
Yeah, it's the pay it forward effect.
Yes.
And I'm a big proponent of that too. I believe that you have an opportunity every day to just make someone else's life just a little bit better by being polite. It doesn't take
Doesn't
anything.
take any bit of energy at all.
And when somebody's having a bad day, just smiling and appreciating, thank you, I appreciate what you're doing. Like those things are little things for us,
Yeah,
but huge things for someone who's going through a hard time. Like even that crusty, checkout lady, you can make her crack a smile. I always see it like
I do that
like a
intentionally. Oh
challenge,
yeah.
right? Like, oh, you're having a terrible day. What can I say to, perk it up a bit and just put a smile on your face, because that could make the difference, right? In that
Yes.
person's day, right? I totally agree with that. But John, we're wrapping it up here, I just want you to ask, like, what's one question or one thing that we didn't talk about today that you think was really important in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think it's relationship building is critical. And it doesn't, I don't mean like, dating and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm talking about just plain old relationships with the people that are around you. We have a tendency to make really quick judgments about people. And that's the thing that really holds us back, I think, is being so judgmental. Stop looking for the differences between us. Look for the things that we have in common. I don't care what color your skin is, what religion you are, how old you are, how skinny, how fat, whatever. None of that makes any bit of difference. We both happen to like this same sports team. We both happen to live in, this town. We both happen to like this kind of food. It does not make a difference. We have something in common with every single individual on this planet. There's no need for us to pound about on our differences. Now, the main factors I think that are so important for making sure that people feel like they matter and for having good relationships around us are these critical elements. The first is trust, which we've talked about. The second is opportunity. There's no reason in the world why you can't give somebody else the same opportunity as the next person. The third is respect. Treat the other person with the respect of an individual. The next is communication, which we've also talked about in more depth. And then finally, that last piece is understanding humanity. And those are the pieces: trust, opportunity, respect, communication, and humanity, that help to light that inner torch. It's an acronym that burns that fire, that motivational fire that keeps us going every day. So, if you want to spark that fire in somebody else, treat them with trust, give them opportunity, treat them with respect, communicate, and treat them with humanity. And that'll get that fire, that inner fire, that glow burning inside of them, so that you can share that fire with other people.
Oh, that's the production value. Yeah, all those years, John. What amazing words. Thank you so much. What do you have going on that you want to make people aware of?
I've got a bunch of programs coming up. I'm actually going to be speaking with a group of middle school students coming down the road here on anti-bullying. I'm going to be throughout the spring look for some workshops on work-life balance and resilience, because I think those are things that we really need. Those will be some virtual Zoom workshops that I'll be putting on in the late spring.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Excellent. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Other than that, I am going into this transitional phase because I've been doing Share Your Fire on the side for about 20 years. I actually made it a real business a while ago, because I've been working to do some coaching, individual coaching, and doing workshops and training for many years. But it's been a side hustle because the day job took precedence. Now that the day job is over, I'll be able to spend more time doing this. So you'll be seeing a video series coming out in the near future, and a lot more offerings.
Okay.
So yeah,
I'll make sure to have all of your links posted on the show notes, so people can reach out, they can follow you. It was a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Pete. It's been wonderful.
All right, and everyone, I will talk to you all next week on Tools for the Modern Man podcast. See you then.